أهلا ومرحبا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. كيف تبدو سياسة أمريكا أولا الخارجية؟ منذ الشهر الأول لإدارة ترامب الجديدة هناك العديد من الأسئلة والأجوبة. من المسؤول عن الحرب بين أوكرانيا وروسيا؟ هل غزت روسيا أوكرانيا أم أن أوكرانيا جلبت هجوم الكويت لروسيا؟ ويبدو أن الرئيس قال كلا الأمرين. هل ينبغي لألمانيا أن تنسى مسؤولياتها التاريخية عن الإبادة الجماعية وأن تصبح بدلا من ذلك دولة قومية فخورة وقوية مرة أخرى وتسترد إدلاتها على النحو الذي أدى إلى الحرب العالمية الأولى والحرب العالمية الثانية؟ هذه هي الرسالة الغريبة من مسؤولي الإدارة الذين يمتدحون الحزب اليميني المتطرف في الانتخابات الألمانية. وبعد الحملة الانتخابية الرئاسية التي ركزت على ضرورة تجنب الهروب في الشرق الأوسط، هل تتضمن سياسة أمريكا أولا الخارجية الاستيلاء على غزة وتحويلها إلى منتجع الكداء الأطل؟ يبدو أن هذا هو ما قال الرئيس إنه يريده. قد تكون لكل هذه التصريحات استراتيجية ذكية وطويلة المدى، سياسة تمنع الحرب وتعزز مكانة أمريكا في العالم، أو ربما لا. لمناقشة السياسة الخارجية في إدارة ترامب الجديدة يسعدني أن أرحب بضيوفنا من الخبراء وانزراتي وجوديث ميلر. Welcome to Dakhel, Washington. American first foreign policy. What does that mean? What does it mean in practice? We've seen some fascinating twists and turns of what the America first president has indicated what his foreign policy will be, and it doesn't sound like the principles of America first on which he ran. America running Gaza, for example. Let's take a look at everything that has happened in the last 6 weeks and what it means for an America first foreign policy. I'm delighted to welcome two of my favorite people, Juan Zarate and Judy Miller. Thank you so much for joining me on Dakhel, Washington. All right, look, America first foreign policy, avoid foreign entanglements, make allies pay for what we help provide, fair trade. How do those principles apply to, let's begin with Ukraine, Russia? What is motivating the president to depict Ukraine as aggressor and Zelensky as dictator? Juan, help explain this.
Well, I think America First foreign policy was assumed to be a neo-isolationist ideology, but it really hasn't been, Rob. To your earlier question, I think what you see is hyper-unilateralist approach where the American president's trying to inject himself into all the key theaters of war and theaters of conflict and trying to play roles. One could say a chaotic role, one could say a disruptive role, but certainly with Russia and Ukraine, the expectation was he was going to have a contrarian view. He was going to lean more toward Russia. He was going to certainly try to draw the conflict to a close aggressively and was going to try to mediate. And what he's ultimately done is he's leaned toward Russia. He's tried to sit between the parties as opposed to being an ally fundamentally of Ukraine. But he's also threatened Russia. So he's been a bit confused in his approach, but this is par for the course for Donald Trump. He is transactional. He's hyper-personalized in his diplomacy, and he is focused on what's good for America, at least in the short term. And that means trying to draw the conflict in Ukraine to a close, and he's going to force the parties to the table. That's what seems to be happening.
So, Judy, the president has certainly upended the last several years of America's approach to Russia, Ukraine. Could he be crazy as a fox? Is this perhaps a brilliant strategy to change the dynamic and bring this war to an end?
Well, Rob, the charitable interpretation of what Trump has done is that he has, as you said, upended the game to kind of get everyone to rethink positions and ultimately drive a bargain which is in America's interest. But I don't see how, by any stretch of the imagination, threatening American allies and siding with Russia, which is clearly what he has done, at least rhetorically to this point, helps America or advances American national security interests. I think what we have seen from Donald Trump so far is nothing short of alarming. And if you believe, as I do, that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, has been a bulwark of deterrence and defense of American interests, then upending it, saying that America has no interest in defending Europe, which is pretty much what he said, is just outrageous. I'll say one possible silver lining is that he has prompted the Europeans to finally step up and agree to pay more for their own defense. But there are nations that are closest to Russia, like Poland, which has been spending 5%, is now spending 5% of its GDP, which is more than the United States, by the way, and other nations which are now rising to the threat. But this is, in my view, telling our most trusted allies who defended us and helped us in Afghanistan and Iraq that we don't care about them is hardly a way to advance American interests.
So let's look at this from a couple of other angles. One, it was recently announced that the United States and Ukraine have reached an understanding or a framework agreement on joint exploitation of Ukraine's mineral wealth. This sounds like something that you do with a close partner or an ally. Is this going to herald a closer partnership with Ukraine, or is this pressure on Ukraine as part of bringing the war to an end?
Well, this is a fascinating deal, in part because it feels like the Trump administration has bullied its way toward this deal, and to Judy's point, is bullying an ally into an agreement that they may not want to agree to at a time when they're suffering the attacks of Russia and the aggression of Russia. But it is interesting. I was in Munich for the security conference, and Senator Lindsey Graham made some key points about this agreement, and I tend to agree with them in this regard, which is this agreement ties the U.S. more directly to Ukraine's success, ties the U.S. to actually defense of the land itself and to its economy, and gives the U.S. more of a stake in Ukraine than it would otherwise. And for a Trump administration that's more transactional, that's looking at financial and economic and commercial interests in the first instance for the United States, this is actually a good strategic move for the Ukrainians to tie the U.S. more directly and to give the U.S. a vested interest. It also gives us the United States interest in opposition to both Russia and China. There is a challenge internationally to who controls rare earth minerals and where those supply chains are coming from. That's a major challenge with China and Russia. And if we can get that from Ukraine, and that becomes a source of both supply chain stability as well as a source of strategic relationship with Ukraine, that could be to Ukraine's benefit. Of course, this has to come with security guarantees. It has to come with other features. But to Judy's point, with the Europeans stepping up, willing perhaps even to send in peacekeepers, this starts to look like an interesting deal that gives Ukraine some more stability and certainly ties the U.S. for the long term. So to your point, this feels like bullying, Rob, from a diplomatic perspective, but it starts to serve Ukrainian strategic interests if it's done in the right way.
So, Judy, we just had a political earthquake in Germany, Europe's largest country, where we saw elected, expected to be the next chancellor, the leader of the Conservative Party. Under normal circumstances, you would think this would be a natural ally of the Republican conservative White House, and yet the chancellor-elect has said we need to build an independent foreign policy and security strategy because of our distance from the United States. What's going on here?
Well, I think the first thing to say, Rob, is that we have really dodged a bullet in Germany. No thanks to Vice President Vance and Secretary of State, or maybe President Elon Musk, who are lecturing the Germans on the need to support the AfD, which is I'm sorry, I don't
the alternative
care.
for Germany.
The alternative for Germany. They have elements in them which are extreme right-wing, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim. This is not anti-democratic, and above all, anti-American. This is not a party that any American should be supporting, and that Germans are so worried about that no political party has been willing to enter into a coalition with them. That being said, I think that soon-to-be Chancellor Merz has made a very important statement, which is the Europeans must begin to rely on themselves more than they have in the past for their own defense. But I would rather have them do that as a positive reaction to American policy rather than as a reaction to what they see as an abandonment of American principles and values and longstanding support, which has kept Europe and the United States safe since the end of World War II.
And Juan, when you see the results of the German election and some other trends that are going on in Europe, do you see a potential for a closer relationship between the new European leadership, or are we in store for deeper distance between Europe and the United States in the years ahead?
Well, I think we're in a period of convulsion where the European leadership, in its variety of forms in different countries, not to mention in Brussels, is trying to determine how to read the American administration. Part of this has to do with mixed messages. You do have J.D. Vance's speech in Munich, which was very much, in some ways, an assault on the internal political and liberal sort of views and operations within Europe. His meeting with the AfD leadership right on the eve of the election, which was very unusual. So there are those messages. Then there are messages, for example, from the Senate delegation that I was with in Munich that was expressing deep ties and deep appreciation for the relationship with Europe. And so much of what I think you saw from European leadership was an attempt to read the tea leaves, understand where the administration is really going, trying to understand if this is just negotiating tactics on the part of the administration to get Europe to spend more, to step up more, to defend itself more. And frankly, there was a view in Munich, and I think among some of the European leaders, that Europe does not now need to defend itself, has to have more independence, but that in so doing, it will garner more respect and, frankly, more alliance with the United States. That what the United States is looking for is a stronger Europe, a more unified Europe. And once it steps up, then the U.S. will be a more willing ally. I think everyone is trying to read the tea leaves, figure out what comes next. But you would have to say with Trump's attempts to push NATO, he has gotten them to focus more on what they need to spend. On pushing Panama with China, he's gotten Panama to concede on the canal and sort of backed away from the extreme rhetoric of taking over the canal. So the extreme of the rhetoric is looking into deals, and I think that's what is the Trump playbook.
All right, when we come back after the break, we're going to look at reverberations of this on the other side of the world, in Asia, and I'm going to ask you about the Gaza as Riviera idea and what that connects to in terms of American first foreign policy in just a moment. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm here with Judy Miller and Juan Zarate talking about the first few weeks of President Trump's foreign policy, which we've seen some remarkable moves around the world. Juan, let me just ask you, I know that you take a special interest in what's going on in Asia. How are our Asian allies, for example, how are they looking at what's going on elsewhere? I mean, when they see our moves on Russia, Ukraine, or with Europe more generally, how does that reverberate on the other side of the world?
Well, I think there are two elements to this, Rob. I think in the first instance, they want to understand where American policy is and whether or not the United States will stand by its allies and defend its interests and allies' interests. And so the Filipinos, the Singaporeans, Southeast Asian allies are, all very much interested, Japan, South Korea, obviously, in where the U.S. goes. And in particular, Taiwan is focused on where U.S. policy goes, broadly speaking, and whether or not the U.S. is willing to expend capital and energy and defense resources to defend interests. So that's a broad question. The other thing I think is happening is I think every country is realizing, I think Japan's done this well, I think the Philippines is doing this well, realizing that they need to think differently about how they engage with the Trump administration. They have to think transactionally. They have to think about economic and financial interests. When the administration put out its America First investment strategy, I think that was a signal to foreign actors to think about how they want to invest in the United States and with the United States. And so countries like Japan and the Philippines, South Korea are thinking not just about the defense and security aspects of the relationship, but how they can attract the U.S. and attract the Trump administration with economic and financial capital and resources. And I think that's part of the dynamic that you see unfolding as well.
Okay, very interesting. Judy, let's turn to a part of the world that I know you've focused a lot on, which is the Middle East. President Trump had a very unusual, perhaps creative, certainly provocative approach to addressing the disastrous situation inside Gaza. It's gone through some evolution since he first mentioned it several weeks ago. But the basic idea of relocation of many Gazans and a long-term American-led reconstruction effort certainly came out of the blue. How do you interpret all this?
Well, I have a somewhat cynical view of this, which won't surprise you, Rob, as an expert on Jordan and the Middle East. I think that what was stunning to me was that this Gaza idea of the Gaza Riviera, or Mar-a-Lago, as they called it down here in Florida, is that, it completely diverted attention from the 45-minute Four Eyes, as the Israelis would say, meeting that Donald Trump had with Bibi Netanyahu, where they discussed the really important things that are likely to happen, which is one, whether or not there will be a second phase of the ceasefire agreement, and two, what the United States and Israel intend to do about Iran and the threat it poses to the region. Three, what's going on the West Bank and whether or not Israel is being too provocative towards the Palestinians who are resident there. We had zero reporting on that in both in the Israeli press, the American press, and the Arab press, because everyone was focused on Gaza and the removal of Palestinians from Gaza, which A, is not going to happen because one, no Arab country wants to take them, and two, the Palestinians, most of them, don't want to leave Gaza, the hellhole that it is. So, but it was a brilliant diversionary tactic.
So you view this as more diversion than a policy prescription.
Absolutely. I think if Donald Trump doesn't understand that this is a non-starter, then we're really, really in trouble. But I will say this. It has, once again, as Juan pointed out with respect to Europe, focused attention on what is to be done with Gaza and the fact that no one seems to have a strategy for dealing either with getting rid of Hamas as the de facto rulers or to how one rebuilds an area which is 3/4 destroyed and in which at least 48,000 Palestinians have been killed.
And Juan, Judy mentioned in passing the issue of the Iran nuclear challenge. The president has said he's not a fan of wars. He's not a fan of using the military instrument if it can be avoided. He'd prefer to negotiate with the Iranians. What's your view on the potential for a negotiated resolution of this challenge?
Well, I think President Trump is open to talking to anybody, as we've seen this with the North Koreans and with Vladimir Putin. Certainly, I think he's left the door open with the Iranians, and I think he probably would like kind of the theater of that kind of diplomacy. But with Iran, he has proven to be quite militant. You see the maximum pressure campaign with sanctions already unfolding. And the administration had signaled that they were going to be more aggressive with the use of economic and financial measures, and they have started to do exactly that. You've seen the rhetoric around allowing Israel to do more. Certainly, the U.S. is providing more of the weaponry that Israel wants, and appears to be getting more allowances from the U.S. in terms of the use of that weaponry. And I think the suggestions in the press have been that the Israelis have thought more and more about going after Iranian nuclear sites kinetically. And this administration seems willing to entertain that. And to your point, Rob, I think what's interesting here is you had a president who came into power talking about America first, talking about not getting into other wars, having neo-isolationist sort of ideological strands embedded in the policies, or at least apparently. But you've had the exact opposite. With Gaza, you have the United States sort of front and center in solving the problem, if not even occupying, at least according to his idea. You have the U.S. driving the Ukraine-Russia resolution. You've got the U.S. in the middle of the Iran-Israel issue. So this is a much more aggressive, in many ways, unilateralist America first foreign policy than I think most had expected. And I think with respect to Iran, that means a more aggressive posture overall.
And I know it sounds like an inside Washington question, but this is a show, of course, called Inside Washington. So when you look at all these foreign policy questions and you look at the key actors around the president, where is the energy coming from? Where are the ideas coming from? Are we talking about the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, special friend, Steve Witkoff, special ally, Elon Musk? Where are you seeing the locus of foreign policy energy coming from? Judy, what do you think?
I think we don't know where a lot of these things are coming from. I do not know where the, if I can use a word, meshugana, where this ridiculous Gaza proposal came from. But I do know that I would tend to disagree with Juan here. I think that Donald Trump is so transactional.
I want to thank you very much, Judy Miller, Juan Zarate, for helping explain these early days to our viewers abroad. Thank you for joining me on Dakhel, Washington. وبهذا تنتهي هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول ما تعنيه السياسة الخارجية لأمريكا أولا، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو مباشرة @RobSatloff. وحتى نلتقي في الأسبوع المقبل، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.